Amid growing outrage on both sides of the aisle surrounding the United Nations, legislation to get the U.S. government out of the UN and evict the scandal-plagued global body from the United States has been reintroduced in the new Congress. If approved, H.R. 193, better known as the American Sovereignty Restoration Act, would end U.S. participation in and funding of the widely ridiculed Dictators Club while protecting American sovereignty under the Constitution. Support for the effort is spreading like wildfire. As in past years, the measure to defend the rights and self-government of the American people from escalating UN attacks will undoubtedly face intense opposition from entrenched globalists and the swamp establishment. However, analysts and lawmakers believe the bill stands its best ever chance of becoming law this session, especially under the anti-globalist, anti-establishment Trump administration and a Congress that remains incensed at a recent anti-Israel UN Security Council resolution targeting Jews in East Jerusalem and other areas. On the campaign trail, Trump, whose campaign was equated with ISIS by a top UN bureaucrat, lambasted the UN, saying it was not a friend of freedom or the United States. He also vowed to cancel key UN agreements in office, including the illegitimate climate regime concocted in Paris in 2015. When do you see the United Nations solving problems? They don't. They cause problems, President-elect Trump declared following the controversial UN vote condemning Israeli settlements. So, if it lives up to the potential, it's a great thing, and if it doesn't, it's a waste of time and money. Globalists appear to be taking Trump's rhetoric very seriously. Global Governance Director Stuart Patrick with the Establishment Council on Foreign Relations, CFR, for example, warned recently that the UN was set to get hammered in the years ahead by the hostile administration and GOP-controlled Congress. The CFR's Patrick, who responded to the systematic rape of children by UN peace troops by demanding more power for the UN, called for the UN to try to dupe Trump into believing that he could use the Dictators Club to get things done. H.R. 193 was reintroduced in the 115th Congress on January 3, the first day of the new Congress, by Representative Mike Rogers, Republican Alabama, and a coalition of liberty-minded lawmakers. While the full text of the legislation is not yet available online, sources on Capitol Hill confirmed that the bill was the same as H.R. 1205 of the 114th Congress, also known as the American Sovereignty Restoration Act. The new bill is currently going under the header, "To End Membership of the United States in the United Nations." If approved, the legislation would repeal the UN Participation Act of 1945, which authorized U.S. involvement, and shutter the U.S. government's mission to the outfit. It would also terminate all membership by the United States in the United Nations, and in any organ, specialized agency, commission, or other formally affiliated body of the United Nations. That specifically includes UNESCO, which President Ronald Reagan withdrew from, along with the World Health Organization, the UN Environment Programme, UNEP, the UN's dictator-controlled Human Rights Council, and more. It would end all U.S. involvement in all UN conventions and agreements, too. The proposed law, introduced in numerous congresses in recent decades, would also end all funding to the UN and all of its agencies, with the estimated savings to taxpayers reaching as high as $10 billion per year, and potentially even more. The legislation prohibits all U.S. military involvement in UN peacekeeping schemes, too, creating a ban on U.S. troops serving under UN command. Finally, following generations of espionage and subversion aimed at the United States conducted by hostile foreign regimes under the guise of UN diplomacy, the bill would evict the UN and its spy and dictator-infested headquarters from U.S. soil. It would also ban any use of American government facilities by the global outfit, while stripping UN bureaucrats and dignitaries of the diplomatic immunity that has become synonymous among critics with the total impunity and lawlessness that pervades the organization. In a statement announcing the bill in the last Congress, Chief Sponsor Representative Rogers explained the reasons why he and many of his constituents in East Alabama wanted to end U.S. government participation in the UN immediately. The UN continues to prove it's an inefficient bureaucracy and a complete waste of American tax dollars, the congressman said, echoing widespread concerns about the international outfit expressed across America and worldwide. Beyond just being a waste, it is also a threat to U.S. interests, sovereignty, allies, and liberties, the Alabama Republican warned. Why should the American taxpayer bankroll an international organization that works against America's interests around the world? He asked. The time is now to restore and protect American sovereignty and get out of the United Nations. The congressman cited attacks on U.S. liberties as a key motivation for the legislation. Although the United States makes up almost a quarter of the UN's annual budget, the UN has attempted a number of actions that attack our rights as U.S. citizens, he explained in the statement. To name a few, these initiatives include actions like the Law of the Sea Treaty, which would subject our country to internationally based environmental mandates, costing American businesses more money, or the UN's work to re-establish an international regulation regime on global warming which would heavily target our fossil fuels. Indeed, the UN has in recent years become incredibly bold in attacking the rights of Americans, and even the US Constitution that enshrines those unalienable rights. From attacks on free speech and gun rights to assaults on parental rights and even America's federalist system of limited government, the UN and its member regimes have become increasingly aggressive during the Obama years. It has also attacked US independence like never before, with recently departed UN boss Ban Ki-moon claiming the UN was the parliament of humanity and that the radical UN Agenda 2030 was the new Declaration of Interdependence. Representative Rogers took special aim at a deeply controversial UN treaty infringing on gun rights that has become a lightning rod for bipartisan opposition across America. The UN has also offered a potential arms trade treaty which would threaten our Second Amendment rights and impose regulations on our gun manufacturers, who are already facing regulations and pressure from the Obama administration, Rogers explained. That treaty, ATT for short, would purport to require gun registration and eventually strict controls. The ultimate aim is disarming civilians and leaving all weapons in the hands of the UN and authorized state parties such as the mass-murdering regimes enslaving North Korea, Zimbabwe, Cuba, China, Saudi Arabia, Vietnam, Venezuela, and other prominent UN members. The UN's anti-Israel bias, which some critics on both sides of the aisle have even dubbed systemic anti-Semitism, also attracted criticism from Representative Rogers. Lastly, the UN does not support Israel and voted to grant the Palestinian Authority non-member state permanent observer status, he argued. Anyone who is not a friend to our ally Israel is not a friend to the United States. Following the recent vote on Israeli settlements, even leading globalists and neocons in Congress have announced plans to defund the global organization. Representative Thomas Massie, ARCI, a co-sponsor of the bill, has also outlined a wide array of reasons for the U.S. government to withdraw from the UN in what he termed an Amexit, or American exit, after the historic Brexit vote in Britain to exit the European Union. Who would be crazy enough to stay in the United Nations and pay the most for their funding while it's attended by third-world dictators who are writing rules and regulations that are supposed to bind our country? Asked the liberty-minded lawmaker in a radio interview promoting the legislation last year. He also suggested that support in Congress for reigning in the UN is strong and growing stronger. When it did come to a vote, we came just 70 votes short of cutting funding for the United Nations, and 70 votes is not a lot, he continued. You flip 35 votes and it's passed, out of 435. I think there will be more attention paid to it as time goes on. I think we're going to pick up momentum. This was trending yesterday on Facebook, this issue. Indeed, Polls show Americans are overwhelmingly dissatisfied with the controversial global body, even in the face of an establishment media that generally conceals the truth about the UN. Congressman Massey, one of the leading constitutional conservatives in Congress, called on listeners to help ensure more co-sponsors for the bill in the U.S. House of Representatives to move it forward. Other co-sponsors on the latest bill include Congressman Walter Jones, RNC, Andy Biggs, Republican Arizona, and Jason Smith, RMO. More are expected. Last Congress, establishment operatives on the House Foreign Affairs Committee were able to keep the bill from moving. This time, with momentum growing fast, that may be more difficult. UN estimates suggest that American taxpayers pay as much as $10 billion per year to support the UN system and all of its tentacles, including the scandal-plagued peacekeeping forces that have become infamous around the world for raping and sexually exploiting children. That means the United States, which is constantly being demonized and attacked for its freedoms by the Dictators Club, pays more than some 185 other nations, combined. In exchange, the United States is constantly attacked by the UN for its constitutional protections. Since the American Sovereignty Restoration Act was introduced in the 114th Congress, more than a few political heavyweights have echoed calls for a full U.S. withdrawal. Among them is former Alaska Governor and GOP vice presidential candidate Sarah Palin, who has become increasingly vocal since Brexit in calling for the United States to sever the UN shackles binding America. I called for our next president, Donald Trump, to call for the unshackling of the political bands tying us to the UN, Palin said in a recent radio interview. It's our money funding the lion's share of the globalist circus. It's we the people needing to rise up and make this a part of the revolution that we have just so benefited from. Senator Rand Paul, RK, meanwhile, has also expressed a desire to dismantle the UN during a campaign stop while a leading contender for the 2016 GOP presidential nomination. I dislike paying for something that two-bit third-world countries with no freedom attack us and complain about the United States, explained the popular pro-liberty senator, the son of liberty icon and former Congressman Ron Paul, Republican Texas, who led the charge for an amic sit in Congress during his long career as an undefeated constitutionalist lawmaker. There's a lot of reasons why I don't like the UN, and I think I'd be happy to dissolve it. In addition to the effort to withdraw from the UN, U.S. lawmakers are also preparing an effort to defund the controversial global institution. I believe Congress should end U.S. taxpayer funding for the United Nations unless and until the UN reverses this anti-Israel resolution, and I believe there will be considerable support in Congress, I hope in both parties, to do exactly that, said Senator Ted Cruz, Republican Texas, adding that the push would come soon, very soon. Even establishment lawmakers are joining the defunding bandwagon as demands for a U.S. withdrawal become mainstream. Defunding the UN may be a good interim step on the road to full withdrawal, helping to neutralize the Dictators Club and the havoc it can wreak in the coming months. However, cutting funds for the UN is no substitute for a complete exit from the increasingly totalitarian global outfit. For liberty and self-government to survive over the long haul, the UN and its globalist agenda must be stopped. Thankfully, Americans now have the best opportunity in generations to get the US out of the UN and the UN out of the United States. It will take hard work and effort. But setting the globalist establishment back by decades while preserving American freedom and independence is